The advent of the Canadian Premier League has caused this last year to be a very exciting time for Canadian soccer. With the introduction of the new league, one thing that is really going to need a major tune-up is the Canadian Championship. The Canadian Championship has always been a very minor tournament. This year they just hit a record high 6 teams. I know, it's huge. And with the advent of a Tier 1 Canadian soccer, the Canadian Championship finally has reason to expand and become a major soccer championship, especially with a spot in the CONCACAF Champions League on the line. And for the Canadian Premier League teams, the Canadian Championship will provide them with a chance to test themselves against the established MLS teams and the established Ottawa Fury and see just how they hold up. So currently the Canadian Championship is a 6-team knockout style tournament with like 2 sub-qualification rounds, with first the winners of League One Ontario and the Quebec Premier League playing each other. Last year was the Oakville Blue Devils and AS Blainville playing each other in a home-and-home knockout match, and then the winner of that going on to play Ottawa Fury, and then the winner of Ottawa Fury and that going on to face the winner of the previous Canadian Championship, which last year was TFC. With the number of teams being expanded from 6 to 13, I don't think that a knockout stage like that is going to work quite as well. It would require a lot of math and a lot of interesting placements of where to put certain teams in. But here's my proposal for how the Canadian Championship should work in 2019. First off, we're going to have 13 teams. We're going to have the 3 MLS teams, we're going to have the 7 Canadian Premier League teams, Ottawa, the winner of the Quebec Premier League, and the winner of League One Ontario. So how I think things should work is, first off, the winner of the Quebec League and the winner of League One Ontario should play their home-and-home series again, and the winner of that should move on to a proper round, and that'll whittle the number of teams down to 12. Then the remaining 12 teams should be divided into 3 geographical groups of 4. So we'd have one group that'd be like Vancouver Whitecaps, Pacific FC, Calgary Cavalry, and FC Edmonton as like the West Coast group. Then we'd have like a central group of like Toronto FC, Winnipeg Valor, Hamilton. And I guess you could put either York 9, or if a League One Ontario team wins the League One Ontario versus Quebec Premier League matchup, then you could either put a League One Ontario team in there and then send one of York 9 or maybe Hamilton over to what I'm going to call the Quebec/East Coast group, which would have Montreal, Ottawa, Halifax, and then if a Quebec team won the Quebec League One Ontario matchup, it would be the Quebec team in that group. The geographical based groups is an interesting idea for many reasons. It gives a chance for these new teams to establish tougher geographical rivalries and help really establish these geographical rivalries, especially between MLS and Canadian Premier League teams moving forward. Like, it would give Toronto and York 9 and Vancouver and Pacific FC a chance to maybe kick off a rivalry if they're forced to play each other in the Canadian Championship. And also, it, of course, will lower travel costs. You don't want to have a League One Ontario team like Oakville having to fly out to Victoria to play Pacific in a game early on in the group stage of the Canadian Championship. That just doesn't make sense for anyone monetarily. Moving forward from group stage, I feel like the winners of each group should move on, as well as the top-ranked second-place team, into a semifinals, where the top team overall, standing-wise, would play the second-place team that moved on, and then the 2 middling, I guess you'd call them, first-place teams would play each other, and then it would just be kind of like what the semifinals finals are now. It's just home and home, home and home, and then the finals would be home and home. I quite enjoy the Canadian Championship. I'm looking really forward to how the introduction of these new teams is going to affect it. I am hoping that it will become a much bigger deal than it currently is. Honestly, having to close out the top section of BMO Field this year in a game where Alphonso Davies was playing in Toronto, that shouldn't happen for a Canadian Championship final. I feel like the Canadian Championship is about to take some major strides in becoming like a legitimate competitive soccer tournament. And with the Canadian Premier League just starting up now, and in the future they're going to keep that league, hopefully will keep expanding and keep adding new teams. And also like League One Ontario and Blainville, and possibly even like further other geographical leagues later on. I'd love to see Calgary Foothills or some of those other Premier Development League teams in the Canadian Championship at some point. So hopefully in the coming years we'll see a continued growth of the Canadian Championship and the growth of Canadian soccer along with it.